The clubhouse cracked like a graham cracker. Water surged through the French doors, turning everything in its path into floating debris. The pool chairs tumbled past like antlered deer, and the trophy case sailed by like a Viking funeral ship. I stood on my driveway holding a thermos of coffee and a set of blueprints that nobody had wanted to read, while Rhonda Penfield, our HOA president, screamed at the rising flood to respect property lines as if water cared about her authority. I'm Evan Calder, a quiet data analyst who mows his lawn in perfectly straight lines and doesn't talk to anyone before his morning coffee. My home is in Willowick Dunes, a subdivision that pretends it's a coastal paradise even though the nearest ocean is nothing more than a souvenir shop display at the mall. We have decorative anchors on mailboxes and street names like Sandpiper Court and Driftwood Lane, despite being 60 miles inland in the middle of suburban sprawl. Our HOA president, Rhonda Penfield, genuinely believes she is the last line of defense standing between civilization and the chaos of lawn flamingos. She drives a white Lexus with a license plate that reads HOA Queen, which tells you everything you need to know about her. My sin. I made the mistake of mentioning that the clubhouse's foundation was flirting with the drainage swale like a nervous teenager at prom. I'd noticed it during my evening walks. Small things at first. Cracks in the patio. Water staining on the foundation. Soil erosion creating little caves under the concrete. The kind of warning signs that any engineer would recognize immediately. I used to do stormwater modeling for a city government for 8 years. I know how water moves, where it pools, and what happens when you ignore the signs. I've seen infrastructure fail. I've watched buildings settle and crack when drainage systems get overwhelmed. So I sent Rhonda a polite memo filled with technical terms like riprap, geotextile fabric, and shear stress calculations. I even included diagrams and recommendations for immediate remediation. She replied with a violation notice for what she called an unneighborly tone and undermining community confidence. Apparently, trying to prevent a disaster is considered rude in Willowick Dunes. The citations started arriving like junk mail. First, it was for unauthorized sandbags that I'd placed near the vulnerable areas. Then came a notice about my gutter downspouts being pointed at an angle that Rhonda claimed suggested defiance. She even wrote me up for a rain barrel that was visible to passing motorists, noting in the citation that it was a possible moonshine operation. I'm not making this up. The woman actually put that in writing. My truck got a citation for being parked 0.2 inches over the edge of my driveway pad. My mailbox flag was cited as being in a non-approved shade of red. She sent me a formal letter demanding I remove a weather monitoring station from my roof because it made the neighborhood look paranoid about climate. Every single citation came with a $50 fine and a smug little note reminding me that HOA compliance was not optional. Rhonda held an emergency HOA meeting where she called my engineering recommendations alarmist Pinterest nonsense. She stood at the podium with her arms crossed and declared that I was fear-mongering about problems that didn't exist. She told the assembled residents that some people just enjoy spreading negativity and that we should focus on beautification instead of invisible problems underground. Then, to add insult to injury, she planted decorative pampas grass along the swale's edge because, in her words, it looks beachy and adds property value. She also banned French drains from the community, calling them too European for a proper American neighborhood. I watched her say this into a microphone with complete confidence. Meanwhile, I kept detailed logs of every rainfall. I took photographs of the erosion happening behind the clubhouse, the way the soil was undercutting the foundation with each heavy storm. I compiled a packet of evidence thicker than the HOA bylaws themselves and submitted it to the board. Rhonda's response? She announced an aesthetic reinforcement plan that involved repainting the clubhouse in a slightly different shade of beige and adding 2 decorative columns that held up nothing but her inflated sense of self-importance. The columns were pure theater. They weren't structural. They weren't supporting anything. They were just there to make the building look more impressive in the HOA newsletter photos. I watched the contractor install them and wanted to scream. We had real problems with water management, and she was spending thousands on cosmetic nonsense. Things took a darker turn when Rhonda filed an official letter to the county claiming our drainage system was fully compliant with all regulations. She carbon copied me on the email just to rub it in my face. The next day, she ordered the grounds crew to remove my sandbags, calling them visual clutter that lowered property values. When I put them back during a storm watch, she fined me $250. When I emailed the county engineer directly with my data and concerns, Rhonda accused me of sabotage and community treason. She actually barred me from entering the clubhouse, claiming I was inciting wetness. Those were her exact words. Inciting wetness. Then the sky decided to weigh in on our argument. A massive thunderhead stalled directly over Willowwick Dunes like it had signed a lease and paid first and last month's rent. The rain came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see across the street. The Weather Service issued a flash flood warning. I sent one final email to Rhonda with the subject line, "This is happening now." She replied, "Stop harassing me or I will pursue legal action." The retention pond, already stressed from weeks of heavy weather, coughed over its banks within an hour. Water clawed its way through Rhonda's decorative pampas grass like it was tissue paper and bit into the clubhouse foundation like it had been patiently waiting for this exact moment. I stood on my driveway and watched the water find every weakness I'd documented. It was like watching a prophecy fulfill itself in real time, except the prophecy had been a 12-page engineering report that everyone ignored. The decorative columns started leaning first. Then the patio buckled. Then the French doors exploded outward from the water pressure inside. Residents came out of their houses in raincoats and started filming on their phones. Someone tried to drive through the flooded street and had to be rescued by a neighbor with a kayak. It was suburban chaos at its finest. By the time the sheriff's department arrived, the clubhouse patio had transformed into an impromptu raft, and Rhonda had suddenly become a philosopher about acts of God and how no one could have predicted this. She was standing under an umbrella, mascara running down her face, telling anyone who would listen that this was unprecedented. Meanwhile, I was still holding my evidence packet, which had predicted this exact scenario down to the likely failure points. The county engineer showed up in his truck, flipped through my evidence packet that I'd sent him, and immediately started barking orders. Evacuate the greenbelt. Secure the gas line. Stop walking through knee-deep muddy water like idiots. He looked at the pampas grass floating past and asked who the hell approved landscaping in a drainage swale. Rhonda tried to explain her beachy vision, but he cut her off and told her to be quiet before she incriminated herself further. Insurance adjusters arrived with cameras and clipboards. They took photos of Rhonda's compliance letter to the county, the one claiming everything was fine. They nodded slowly while reviewing the documents, the way doctors nod when you tell them your diet consists mostly of gas station pretzels and wishful thinking. When Rhonda tried to blame me for attracting water with negative energy and bad vibes, the deputy sheriff raised an eyebrow and asked her a simple question. Why exactly had she removed emergency sandbags during an active storm watch? Rhonda suddenly remembered she had an urgent meeting to attend. Somewhere else. Anywhere else. 45 minutes of pure hydraulic theater later, the clubhouse surrendered to physics. The non-structural columns, those painted Doric cosplay props that Rhonda had been so proud of, snapped at their bases and bobbed away down the street like oversized white pool noodles. The crowd of residents gasped in unison. Someone yelled, "That's our security deposit." Another neighbor just stood there filming everything on their phone, narrating the destruction like a nature documentary. The district attorney's investigator showed up the next morning. She collected Rhonda's emails, the falsified maintenance logs where she'd checked off drainage inspections that never happened, and the contractor's invoice for something called swale grooming. That line item turned out to be nothing more than planting the decorative pampas grass. The investigator also found emails where Rhonda had explicitly instructed the landscaping company to ignore my warnings, and where she told the HOA treasurer not to budget for any drainage work because it would, quote, make us look weak and paranoid, unquote. The local news ran my time-lapse footage of the bank erosion side by side with clips of Rhonda's speech about resilience through positive thinking and aesthetic solutions. They interviewed residents whose cars had been damaged by the flooding. They showed the floating columns. They even got a statement from the county engineer calling the situation entirely preventable and the result of willful negligence. The comment section on the news website achieved something rare, complete bipartisan unity in mocking her. The county hit our HOA with massive fines and mandated real structural reinforcement with proper engineering oversight. They put Rhonda on a 2-year probation from serving on any homeowner association board in the entire county. But the real consequences came down harder. She owed full restitution to the HOA for the damages her negligence caused. The judge also sentenced her to 300 hours of community service, which she would perform by installing riprap under the supervision of the county engineer and handing out educational brochures titled Drainage. It's not a vibe, it's physics. The HOA's special assessment to rebuild the clubhouse, the one that would have cost each household thousands of dollars, got completely waived by the insurance company. They subrogated against Rhonda's directors' and officers' liability policy and went after the landscaping company that had mistaken a critical drainage swale for a beach resort photo opportunity. My sandbags, the ones Rhonda had repeatedly fined me for, were officially codified in the new HOA rules as community flood mitigation aids and given protected status. The final bill came to over $80,000 in fines, legal fees, and restitution. Rhonda's face when the judge read that number out loud was something I'll remember forever. She actually gasped and grabbed the table in front of her for support. Her lawyer tried to argue for a payment plan, but the judge wasn't interested in negotiations. Full payment was due within 90 days, and Rhonda walked out of that courtroom looking like someone had replaced her spine with a pool noodle.